All right, so I went. You may remember a couple, 3 months ago, Natalie Hottie was here, who was our global grant scholar, and she went around and visited the clubs that sponsored her. Well, when it was in Edmond, I was approached by a buddy of mine who said, "You need to have Paul Conrady come talk to your club about hyperbolics for hyperbarics rather for veterans." And when I think of hyperbarics, I think of extreme deep sea diving, right? I don't really think of therapies first thing. Well, that's what they're doing, and it's pretty exciting stuff. So, Paul Conrady, come on up.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you. So thanks for having me up here. I am at the Rotary Club in Edmond, and they pulled out a directory from 1991, and they were showing all the pictures up there, and there was my picture, and everybody goes, "Well, I don't even know that guy," and I said, "That's because I was 65 pounds heavier back in 1991, so a lot of the new people didn't recognize that picture." But man, when they start dragging out that old a picture just because you were in Rotary, anyway. Uh, Thanks for having me. I got so many stories. I try to stay away from the stories, but people just don't understand what hyperbarics is and how long it's been around. So I've been doing this with. I joined Patriot Clinics back about 10 years ago, and that was a gentleman that used up all of his resources to dive veterans. And a friend of mine was in church bawling his eyes out shortly after I had been to a counterterrorism conference down at the Capitol and heard about this guy walks up, we're talking, and he says, "I fix brains using hyperbarics." And he started talking about PTSD. And if there's any veterans in here, excuse me for what I'm about to say because I've learned, but I always thought PTSD was nonsense. Hey, soldier, you get back in country, you need to re-engage, you need to go take care of your family, you need to go back to work. This full ride, damage that you're saying that you have just doesn't make sense. Well, God has a way of straightening people out that are like me. I put his card in my pocket Friday afternoon, and Sunday I'm at church, and the guy in front of me just crying. And I said, "So, what's wrong?" And he goes, "I just got back in country." And I said, "Oh, appreciate your service." I said, "What's going on?" And he goes, "I got PTSD so bad, I don't know if I have a place to go right now because last night I about got violent with my family." And I'm like, "Wow, okay, well, I guess that's what PTSD is." And I said, "Hold on." And I pulled that card out of my pocket, and that friend of mine was in a chamber that afternoon because a gentleman learned about hyperbarics with his son, and he was an appropriator with ISTUC in Washington, and he appropriated medical money. And so he knew of a guy in Baton Rouge, Paul Harch, that was diving soldiers to fix their brain to fix PTSD. And his son told him, "I'm about to kill myself. I want you to find my body, not mom." That was on Friday. On Monday, they were in Baton Rouge, and 40 sessions later, he ended up getting married, had 3 kids. I mean, just absolutely changed his life. So he became advocate, and it was his mission to help veterans. And he used up all of his financial resources to do about 14,000 sessions for veterans. So I got in the middle of that, tried to guide the ship because he didn't charge anybody anything, and we all know that's not a very good business model. And he could never get a 501c3 in place to raise funds, and so anyway, it was a bad deal. I ended up going up to Edmond, opening up a hyperbaric chamber facility with my brother, hyperbaric oxygen, and 2.5 years in, I talked to a guy in New Hampshire. He had a client in Oklahoma City, and he wanted him to dive, and he wanted to provide me the protocol. And I said, "Hey, I'll talk to this guy, and I'll get hooked up with him." So we talk about hyperbarics for an hour, and at the end of that hour, I'm getting ready to hang up, and he said, "Full disclosure, I don't use oxygen." Well, again, God's in this so many ways, and Paul knows a lot of this. So we're sitting there talking, and I said, "Okay, well, I have all this background as the secretary of the International Hyperbaric Medical Foundation about hyperbaric air. because every time it came up in our board meeting, which comprised of hyperbaric doctors all over the world, every time that subject came up in our board meeting, it was a battle. It just went south. I mean, it was catastrophic. So I knew there was something to it, and when he told me that, I'm like, okay, well, let's keep talking. So I started diving this person without oxygen. And this person, he had a lot of things that were wrong with him that got resolved, but his vision wasn't one of them. But we started diving other people without oxygen, and we were having the same outcome as we did with oxygen. So here's a little background on why this is so crazy. In 1662, guess what they started doing? Compressing air and putting people in that compressed air. And they got better. All different kinds of modalities. People always ask me, well, Paul, you say that fixes everything. Well, it does, because what you're doing is you're stimulating stem cell production. That's what's actually the reason for our healing in there. And it also, hyperbaric air creates vasodilation. Anybody know what that is? So if you go to the gym and you're working out, your old veins start popping out, well, that's because you're getting the blood flowing, and that's called vasodilation when those veins open up. And so now you're nourishing your body with more blood, more nutrients, and that's why you want to get your blood flowing. So anyway, that's what hyperbaric air does. So that's around 1830. That was the first chamber made that a doctor could come and go through a lock to enter the chamber. So he would put his patients in there, and he'd come and go from that other cylinder to get in and out of the chamber. Who knew that this technology's been around that long? And this is all hyperbaric air. So here's about 1830, they made a different type, a different drawing. I just went back and found as many drawings as I could. They started getting bigger. They could put more people in there. They could compress this chamber and hold pressure in the chamber with more people. You know, the trick here I keep saying is more people, right? So here's one that they even made mobile in 1877. Fontaine made a mobile one, and I don't know if he took it to houses or different hospitals or what. I can't find that information, but if you can imagine, those are organ bellows that two people would crank, and those are organ bellows that they would use to pressurize that chamber. So I'll jump all the way up into 1928. Actually, in 1921, Dr. Cunningham built a chamber and started treating people that had viruses. Anybody hear of Dr. Cunningham during COVID? They talked about him a great deal because he was a doctor that was able to cure the Spanish flu back in the day using hyperbaric air. So when all this COVID stuff was going on, our industry went to the federal government and said, look back in history at what happened with the Spanish flu. This doctor was curing the Spanish flu. The coronavirus is a virus, and we have hyperbaric chambers parked on tarmacs all over the world. Why are we going to the hospital infecting other people when the people with COVID could go get into an airplane? The oxygen distribution's already there, and we could be pressurizing those aircraft, and that could be helping cure our issues with the coronavirus. We didn't get very far with that. So anyway, I'm going to jump forward. Anybody know what that is? That is not a glass coffin with Michael Jackson in it. Everybody that sees this picture, they always ask me, well, what is a hyperbaric chamber? And I said, you remember seeing Michael Jackson in a glass coffin? Yeah. I said, that's not a coffin. It's a hyperbaric chamber. He got burned in the Pepsi commercial. So it burned the whole top of his head in a Pepsi commercial, and they put him in a chamber to resolve that injury. And he had such success with it that he put one out at Neverland. And so he was in a hyperbaric chamber a great deal because of what he got out of it. So now, who needs this? Well, hey, a mom in an abusive relationship causes PTSD. A student in college with professors causes PTSD, right? So there's all kinds of things, people that have autistic kids. Well, the autistic child can benefit greatly by hyperbarics, but nobody ever thinks of the parent that has PTSD because they're living on the edge their whole life. It's just crazy. So a lot of people can benefit from hyperbarics because of what it does for PTSD. Imagine, so our protocol, our minimum protocols, we go to 2.5 atmospheres. So we already heard oxygen is 20.9% of our atmosphere. When you compress that to 2.5 atmospheres, what is our oxygen content in the chamber now? Yeah, 52%. Okay, so without adding supplemental oxygen, we can compress that atmosphere and get to 52%, or we can even go deeper. We have a new protocol that we're working on right now. It's 60 feet, so we get to 2.8 atmosphere, right at 60% oxygen. And if I can get 60% oxygen and I can and it's smaller, I have a balloon in our chamber, and that balloon in the chamber will reduce in size, and I tell people that's what the oxygen molecule is doing. If you can reduce the oxygen molecule, now it will go past the blood-brain barrier. It'll dissolve into our plasma at a higher rate, and it's so small now it will penetrate and go past the blood-brain barrier. So that's the impetus of what does hyperbarics do. It's compressing everything and allowing it to travel through our body at a higher rate. So everyone needs this. So I'm back to size. That's the chamber that we bought after we started that one that Michael Jackson was in. We have monoplace chambers that are a little bigger than that, but that's what we treat people in, one at a time. So in a day's time with our 2 chambers, we can treat 8 people. Every hour I can treat 12 people. At one location I can treat 84 people a day.
They stand for 1 hour roughly?
1 hour is typical, and so we go every 2 hours. We have both protocols. Another protocol is an hour and 20 minutes, but we can turn that around every 2 hours. And with an extended day, having staff on at night that can deal with people that work during the day, having an extended day, we can do 84 people a day. So what's that called? Scale. And when you scale things, what do? You reduce the cost. So our whole desire and intent is to scale this to where we can get people in without oxygen. Let's go back, let's step back a minute. If you come into our clinic up in Edmond and you're going to do an oxygen dive, what's involved now? Medical. What happens if we can take medical out of the equation? Reduction in cost. No prescription. We're not having to put in scrubs. We're not having to completely dress in scrubs to get into a sterile environment that has absolutely no possibility of a spark that might create an explosion. Okay, so you have all these safety factors and medical issues that you have to deal with when you deal with 100% oxygen. I'm gonna again regress back. The AMA, after Cunningham built his chamber and he was treating so many people and having such success, the medical community stepped in and tried to shut it down. The way they tried to do that is, let's patent that process. Let's patent pressure. Let's patent oxygen. Let's patent atmosphere. Well, they found out God holds a patent on oxygen, and they couldn't monetize it, right? So they fought that industry, and they did everything they could to stop that industry from expanding. And so much so that as they moved into oxygen in the 30s and started having success, the Navy is who was using oxygen in the 30s, 40s. They started studying it. Well, finally in 1987, I think, the AMA made oxygen a drug. So now they have control of it again. And when the AMA made oxygen a drug, it stopped a lot of things. Nobody was doing hyperbaric air anymore at that point. Everybody was locked on hyperbaric oxygen, and it's so heavily regulated. And my understanding, if anybody's from the hospital here, the last time I had a function and we talked about hyperbarics, it was at a different kind of function, but it was here in Stillwater. At that time, hyperbaric oxygen at Stillwater Regional was $6,200 an hour. Is anybody involved with the hospital here that might know if that's changed? I heard some cash numbers recently that were lower than that, but the reason that nobody's ever in the chamber, in fact, a friend of mine called up there after I had that meeting. He said, I think I benefit. I'm going to call up there and see if that's true. And it was $6,200 an hour, and the person he was talking to said, nobody can get their insurance to approve this, so we don't ever use it. The only people that use the chamber is the athletic department here in town. Who pays for that? I'm just kind of, the athletic department's the only one using the chamber. It really surprised me that nobody else has access. So again, if we can scale, if we can eliminate oxygen, you guys will not believe the outcomes that we have in this chamber. And what is so fun about it is if you're doing hyperbaric oxygen, you've got a hood on. So you're in there reading a book or you're doing something. We have a party every hour in that chamber where everybody in there learns from everybody else who has a deficit. How are you getting past your deficit? What are you doing in the alternative medicine world to resolve your issues? Hyperbarics and medicinal mushrooms, hyperbarics and there's just all kinds of things. Is anybody in here doing any alternative medicines? I mean, is anybody in that world, or are we still all in the medical world what our doctor says and prescribes? Have we ever looked outside of that envelope? Everybody in that chamber has looked outside that envelope. And it's amazing what you can do in that chamber, and then using peptides. We got a person with us right now that hasn't walked for a year, about a year and a half, has not been able to walk. She got hooked up on peptides from a doctor in Virginia, and she started diving, and she's getting her mobility back. Now she said the other day, for the first time in 15 months, I stood up and hugged my husband, standing. So she's on the road to recovery. And she's been to every specialist in this country. She's got a deficit on what's called the myelin sheath. So she had an injury that a virus attacked the myelin sheath, and she's lost her nervous system from her shoulders down. So we're building it back. Does it come instantly? No. It's over time. Most of our protocols, if you have something that's chronic, most of our protocols are 40 sessions. If you buy 40 sessions up front and prepay them, it's $3,000. So anyway, I know everybody's got an idea. What does it cost to do this? I'm not trying to sell anything. I'm trying to give you some understanding of the cost. Again, $6,200 an hour or $75 a session. I mean, so what we're hoping to do is, I met some people in here that have had some, I've got some people right now I'm dealing with. They came in and they've been to the wound care clinic multiple times, and they're getting worse on every visit. So they came in with me, and I said, well, the first thing you have to do is quit going to the wound care clinic. And they're like, what? And I said, they're not letting it heal. They keep exacerbating the problem, and they're not letting it heal. What we're going to do is we're going to bandage. Now, we don't bandage anything. You come in and you're on a ride, an amusement ride. But if you'll go and deal with the bandaging and you come into our chamber, I want you to do nothing to that wound. At night, I want you to open it up. No creams, no nothing on it. God will heal it if you'll allow it. And they think I'm crazy. And I've had two people that came in with orders to have their toes amputated, and they have their toes. And I've got their orders, and I'm like, send that. You know what it costs to have a toe amputated? Blue Cross Blue Shield, one of my clients just came back. He had one amputated, and he said, I know I'm on the path to have my next one amputated. And I said, well, not if you get in the chamber. He talked to his doctor. His doctor wouldn't write him a script for hyperbarics. That's reimbursable by insurance. That's one of the 14 things you can do in a chamber to resolve a medical issue. And his doctor said it won't help. And I said, dude, that's like saying the sun isn't going to come up tomorrow, because this has been so studied. This is the standard of care for that injury. So anyway, he wouldn't write a script, so our medical director wrote him a script. He got in the chamber, and they wrote him a script for 60 sessions, and at 38 sessions, he was totally resolved. Okay? So my deal with hyperbaric air is when these clients come in and they've got orders for an amputation, and in 27 sessions they're totally healed, they need to send their ticket to their insurance company and demand that it gets paid, because they just saved them $93,000 for that toe amputation. So if you can resolve it, we're not asking for insurance to pay up front. We're saying, hey, if I pay for this out of my pocket and I resolve the issue, the reason I have insurance is not to be in this situation. So you need to pay me back. Now, if you come in and do 40 sessions and nothing changes, obviously you don't have a path to reimbursement. But I encourage people that have issues that aren't getting resolved at their doctor's office to come and do this and then help me help others by going to work and getting your insurance to reimburse you. Even though it wasn't pre-authorized, you know, that's what they always say, hey, you didn't pre-authorize this. Well, I tried and you wouldn't authorize it, so I had to go do it myself. So anyway, medicine's going to change. It's being forced to change. We can't keep doing what we're doing. And the Western medical world needs to be a little more open to what's going on in alternative medicines. There's just a tremendous amount of education out there. Does anybody follow any alternative medicine doctors? Does anybody? I don't know the group I'm talking to. So there's a Dr. Buttar, and his son had autism. You're going to cut me off at 5 till? 3 till? So his son had autism 25 years ago, and he's a DO, and he cured his son of autism using chelators and hyperbarics. Okay? So when COVID started, he was real into what COVID was, and he was one of the frontline doctors that stood. He didn't personally himself stand on the steps at the Supreme Court, but all of his doctor friends did, and they all lost their privileges because they were promoting hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. So they put this big group of doctors together, and for the last 3 years, he's been doing conferences teaching other doctors about outside the box. What do we do? What can we do outside the box? What's not in our playbook? So in September, he was at an event, and he became poisoned. And they did blood work, and they identified that he had 200 times the mRNA vaccine in his system. And he had never taken a shot. So what happened back then? I don't know. But last week, he was talking about this in a live interview. He's talking to one of his cohorts, and they were promoting the event that is this weekend. It's where he teaches doctors about outside-the-box remedies. So he's talking about the fact that he had been poisoned back in September, and hey, look, I'm still alive. God has me here for a reason, and I'm still promoting this. When I saved my son, I told God I'd do everything I could to encourage and help other doctors do the same. 3 days later, he was dead as he was preparing for this next conference. So there's a lot of conspiracy stuff going around right now. What did it? There's no autopsy back. But 6 years ago, 38 what we call integrative medicine doctors, a lot of them are doctors that are working outside the box. 6 years ago, 38 of these integrative doctors died unexpectedly. And one of them is somebody that's close in my industry that we have direct. He was working with autistic kids. He had a van full of hyperbaric chambers, the inflatable kind, and he was going to churches on the East Coast, diving kids for a greatly reduced amount of money. And he was unfortunately promoting the fact that I think this came from vaccines. That was part of his speech as he was working with these parents. And he was found floating in the river with a gunshot in his back. He's no longer with us. And he was doing great work. He was doing great things for kids with autism. We gotta be engaged. We gotta have an open mind. If you know people that have any interest in this, I'd love to talk to them. What we're doing right now, that chamber right there, that's the one at Integris. I own one that's exactly like that sitting in a warehouse in Tulsa that I'm trying to get located. That's my first graduating group of PTSD victims. They're all military, and they all got a story. When you're in there in the chamber together, it's incredible what happens to these veterans that have been isolated in their bedrooms. They never come out of their house. They can't be in a crowd. They're just not going to do that. And when they get in here and they start sharing stories with people that are in the same situation and they die 40 times, they are a totally different person at the end of those 40 sessions. And if any of you in here know of anybody that fits that description, I want you to contact me. Hyperbarics for Heroes is laying on your tables. Hyperbarics for Heroes, we've invested about $200,000 in treating veterans at this point. We finally got our 501c3 up and running, got our board on board, and we're going after the veteran community. Not only for PTSD, which is not recognized by the VA, but non-healing diabetic foot wounds. Okay, again, we talked about that's what you do. That is the standard of care. We just got a report about 3 weeks ago, a study that was done through the VA. Our industry did the study. 70% of veterans die within 3 years of their first amputation. They are never told about hyperbarics. They just cut limbs off. And if you understand what happens with a diabetic foot wound, there's an infection. So when you cut that toe off, you've not done anything to stop the infection. So you're going to cut another toe and another toe and another toe. And again, within 3 years of the first amputation, 70% of our veterans are no longer with us. So we got to stop that. That's insane. And when you read the report, if you read the report, you can take veteran out and put tribal member in. The tribal community is they're in the same shape as the veteran community. Nobody's giving them the opportunity to get in a chamber to heal that non-healing wound before they cut it off. So if you know of anybody that's in those situations, love to talk to you. I'm going to end here. Everybody's got these wounds. Post-COVID, non-healing wounds, kidney. So he didn't change my typo there. So kidney and liver issues, migraines, before you get to depth on your first dive, probably 75% of our clients are headache-free. If you know of anybody with a migraine, they can't believe how fast it resolves. It's gone. Pre and post surgery, you heal in 1/3 the time. If you do hyperbarics twice before you do surgery, you will heal in 1/3 the time. So what is it worth to spend $1,000 doing 10 sessions of hyperbarics when you're going to be off 6 weeks? I had one gal had a revision surgery. They didn't want to do it because she had such problems on the first one, and she had a revision surgery. She was back at work in a week, and they told her she'd be off 6 weeks. Oh, I got so many stories. Stroke recovery was another one. But here's what I'm doing today. This just happened this morning. We built a site. If you can think of a GoFundMe page, that's what we're doing with Hyperbarics for Heroes. I'm looking for individuals that want to get help to post a bio that people can fund them individually. And then we're looking for community-wide. If I could get $100,000 out of Stillwater as a community to our 501c3, I would put a chamber here and it would be available to the community. You wouldn't have to drive an hour and a half. And the thing about hyperbarics is it's daily. If you're going to get benefit, it's daily for a series of dives. So Paul's got some ideas that he just hit me with. Somebody told me to talk to Chuck Musgrave. I'm going to go after monies.
You told us about the successes. Now tell us about the failures. Just 1 second. Yeah, you've told us about the successes. Now tell us about the failures.
Okay, if I had one person that came in they were there to regain their vision that they lost in a bladder surgery. The doctor had them inverted on the table for 2.5 times longer. When they woke up, they were blind. And he was hoping to get that back. He didn't. But we fixed his bladder. We fixed all kinds of other things. So even if we don't get that targeted item, which is very seldom, 100% of our concussions, 98% of our migraines, they get resolved. It's not a failure because the rest of your body is going to benefit.
I don't believe any medical procedure is as successful as that. And what about relapses? What about temporary fixes that turn out to have a relapse?
I'm sorry,
What
who has a
about
relapse?
Relapse.
Well, that's why what we do is we have an ongoing maintenance. So when you get done with your 40 sessions, we put you in an ongoing maintenance and come in at once a week, and then we feather that to once every 2 weeks, and then we monitor that, trying to eliminate the relapse. But as far as a non-healing wound, it's healed, and if you have another one come back, it's not because of it's a relapse, it's because of something within your diabetic. So you would start the protocol again.
Yeah, I was going to ask about 40 sessions, except for weekends. Is that 40 consecutive days, or how long does it take?
Lots of ways to do that, and that's individual because we all work. A lot of us work, and so we come up with game plans for that. You can do 2 a day. So if you do 2 every other day or twice a week, you do 4 sessions. There's a lot of ways to work around that. Consistency is key. And I'm at 2 minutes still. Thank you a million. I'd love to answer any more questions.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks. Yes.
So I do work at the hospital. You said a couple of things about the wound care and the hyperbaric chamber there. Thank you for talking. This is a really interesting topic. We do have hyperbarics at the hospital. I don't know what it costs per hour, so you commented on that, and I don't have information to verify or not that. I can tell you, though, that many insurances do cover hyperbaric treatments, and many patients do get hyperbarics at our hospital, and no, Oklahoma State Athletics does not utilize the hyperbaric chamber. And I can tell you that I can assure you that Blue Cross Blue Shield does not reimburse $93,000 for a toe amputation.
That, all I'm sharing with you is what a client has told me, that's what his insurance reimbursed at Oklahoma at the OU Medical in Edmond.
You may verify because that would be the highest reimbursement in the nation.
Okay. Okay. What is a toe amputation ballpark?
Well, let's use a comparison. Total knee replacement or a hip replacement, which is a 2-night stay in the hospital, is reimbursed between $15,000 and $20,000.
Is that right?
So a toe amputation, which is an outpatient procedure, I think logically we would say that's an inaccurate statement.
Well, I would love to. I'll follow that up. And by the way, the person that gave me all that information was the electrician. He in charge of the plant at the hospital. He was at that meeting, and he's the one that was giving me the numbers. So, not
Well,
a doctor,
I would
not in the
encourage-
office. So,
I would encourage anyone that can hear my voice
Right.
to verify that with your payer or the
Right.
hospital,
Right.
because that seems very anecdotal. With all due respect.
but it is covered. I mean, the whole thing is the insurance is supposed to cover that. So, you should be able to get those services.
Well, not to belabor the topic, but we do have deductibles and we do have co-insurance that
Right.
individual members are responsible for
Right.
too.
Right.
All right. Well, Paul.
I stand corrected. I'll search all that out. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Well, Paul, thank you for coming
Thank
up
you.
and presenting fascinating information in our club.